Hey everyone, my name is Rick Gualtieri and welcome to another Tales of a Midlist Author. This week, well, I'm probably doing what I'm thinking 90% of the other, V-bloggers are doing. I wanted to talk about the CopyPasteCris fiasco that's going on. Started off, I'd say, I don't want to downplay it, but it started off simply enough, and since then it's kind of snowballed. For those of you who have been, living in a cave the last couple weeks, this whole thing started when it was discovered that, and I'm going to probably butcher her name, but Christiane Saruya, she's a Brazilian quote unquote novelist, and it was kind of discovered that there's chunks of other people's work within hers, and apparently the rabbit hole goes pretty deep. Apparently, it's from the sound of things, there is a ton of plagiarism claims that can be leveled against her. She's stolen from like big names up to Nora Roberts and possibly beyond. Now, when this broke, at first it was kind of like, oh, I would never do this, and then suddenly the blame switched to it must have been these ghostwriters I hired on Fiverr, as if that really made it better. And then she pretty much just disappeared from social media, because at that point it was kind of like nobody's believing your crap, and you most certainly have the legal dogs coming after you. Being that she is in Brazil, whether or not that does any good, I don't know. And I think this is bad enough, and I think it would have been mostly focused on the concept that plagiarism is bad in this industry. It exists. It sucks. If you're a victim of it, it definitely sucks. And if somebody's doing it to you, they're almost always going to come back to you with excuses along the lines of, oh, well, I made it, I did my mistake, or, oh, I'm going through a bad time. I only did it once. And it's always going to be bullshit. So it probably would have kind of stopped there, except when she brought up the concept of, well, it's the fault of the ghostwriters I hired. And since then, it kind of snowballed. A few ghostwriters who apparently have worked with her have come forward and said, well, she tends to send out these snippets that are cut from these other books and say, hey, write around this. And apparently, hiring cheap ghostwriters for pennies on the dollar, and they're just like, fine, I'll just write a story around this, not bothering to change this stuff. Which I guess, I don't know if she hoped that they would or not. I don't know. I'm not in her mind, but either way, you wind up with this giant mess. So, like I said, it probably would have stopped at the whole concept that plagiarism is bad, and we've gone through this as an industry before, and it does suck when this does happen. But now it's kind of snowballed into kind of like this whole, I guess, up in arms against ghostwriters, which is kind of taking on its life of its own. And Nora Roberts, I know she kind of like wrote a couple blog posts regarding this, and each one getting a little more angry than the last, and it's kind of snowballed. That's also snowballed, and as a result, we're kind of in a situation where it's kind of devolved into a bit of a witch hunt, and those are never good. So showing outrage for plagiarists, showing outrage for scammers, that is, I'm all for that. But avoid witch hunts, because the problem is almost inevitably somebody's going to get caught up in it who doesn't deserve it. So let's talk about ghostwriters first. There's there's a lot of debate going back and forth of of how legitimate it is to to use ghostwriters. And the reality is people have used ghostwriters for since there's been publishing. It's legit. It's a legit business form. Nothing wrong with it. But I think what's coming under scrutiny is how it's being used. So, for example, if you're using a ghostwriter, and we're not even talking about nonfiction ghostwriters and autobiographies and stuff, those are very common. But if you're in fiction and using a ghostwriter, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem if you're like, hey, I'm putting out like 4 books a year and I have a 5th, but I have a deadline. So I hired a ghost to do this, and I paid them fair market rates and stuff. I don't think anybody's losing their minds over that. But I do think there's a lot of scrutiny about people who are kind of using ghostwriters to up their rapid release schedule, where, well, hey, I could maybe do 3 or 4 novels myself, but hey, I hired a bunch of ghosts off of Fiverr. I'm paying them $50 to $100 for 50,000 words, and now I can release 24 books in a year. I think people are kind of losing their minds a bit about that. One thing to keep in mind about that, though, is Is it scummy? Like I said, if you're using it to kind of augment a rapid release schedule and you are paying pennies on the dollar, not fair market rates, yeah, I think it is kind of scummy. But is it against terms of service? That's a bit more of a gray area in which I would probably argue no. I would argue that you probably are playing within the rules set forth on Amazon and such. Um, but I guess how you're doing it. So the question is this actionable against somebody? And the answer is probably not. If they're coloring within the lines and they're just doing it in a way you don't like, well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do about that. Um, but the thing is, this is exploding into vitriol against those writers who maybe aren't writers really at this point, so much as publishers or marketers pretending to be writers, and they probably do deserve a little bit of vitriol. I'm not gonna say they don't, but also. But this is kind of exploding against ghostwriters, and it's kind of like sucking them all in. And the thing is, there's plenty of legit ghostwriters out there, and there's plenty of legit reasons to use ghostwriters, and that's unfair. So before you jump on that bandwagon, just kind of step back and remember that you're painting an entire group with a very broad brush, when the reality is the problem is probably confined to a relatively small percentage. Um, so focus on the true scammers, people who are actually plagiarizing, doing things that are legal or against TOS. Or another thing that's been suggested is Amazon. They're the ones who created this environment, this Kindle Unlimited environment, and the ones who seem to not really want to police it by their own rules. They put the rules out there and then they police it kind of arbitrarily. And they're probably the ones who need to kind of have the pressure put on them, because ultimately the thing with scammers is it's really hard to scammers are like chameleons. You knock down one and they'll pop up 5 minutes later with a new pen name. So it's more the environment, I think, that needs to be railed against than looking at easy targets. Think of it this way: when with regards to witch hunts, is people are putting out profiles and stuff and be like, well, here's a profile that seems to fit a scammer. No, they don't have maybe they have it's a first book under a pen name and they've never and it suddenly is rocketed to the top 10, or they have no author photo, or they do this or they do that. The problem with that is there's plenty of legit authors who have pen names, or maybe they launch something and they have a big mailing list and they're doing everything legit, or maybe they're spending a lot of money on AMS, but maybe they have a valid reason. Maybe they're writing erotica and they're a kindergarten teacher. They don't want their face up there. Here's the thing with the true scammers out there. They're kind of like serial killers, in that the whole concept is they look like everybody else. So you really can't put a profile out there. The reality is, when it comes to people who are out there scamming the system, it's really only those who are stupid or greedy who are easy to spot. And I mean, here's an example. A while back, I reported somebody to Amazon, because and other people noticed this too. They were in Kindle Unlimited, their books, but they were also wide, and all they did with their books was they gave it a different title. It was the exact same books, and they were essentially cheating the system. You're supposed to be exclusive with Kindle Unlimited, so they just took their stuff, put it in a different title, and said, "Oh, I'm going to have my cake and eat it too." That fell into the category of both stupid and greedy, because it was the work of maybe about 10 minutes, still doing the work of of making sure, of basically taking screenshots and saying, these are the exact same books. Here's Amazon, here's Kobo. Guys, it's just a different title. So, but outside of that, a lot of these people who are taking advantage, they're working behind the scenes. They're working in closed groups that you're never going to see. They're doing, and they're beneath so many layers of pen names that you knock one down, what do they care? They'll just bring it up under another. So that's what I'm saying is the witch hunts don't really accomplish much. In fact, if anything, they probably like the witch hunts, because I put it out there that it might be possible that some of the scammers are the ones perpetuating the witch hunts, because they're so good at hiding that if a few innocent people get caught up, hey, that's great. Doesn't matter to them. It takes the pressure off of them, so they can go back to doing what they're doing. So avoid internet witch hunts, avoid profiling, any of that stuff. And if you do suspect somebody of wrongdoing, do your research, build up a case. And the first thing you probably should do, rather than naming and shaming, is bring it to Amazon, because it probably should be their job to do this. Assuming they're not doing something heavily illegal, and you should talk to a lawyer or the police. And I would say the only time I would probably bring it public at that point is, and I mean, and I don't mean discussing it in closed groups with other authors. I mean like public, is if I think I have an open and shut case and Amazon has refused to do anything about it. And even then, you have to be careful, because you do it the wrong way, you can open yourself up to a defamation lawsuit very easily. I will add a caveat to there, is that some of these scammers also play that game where they're like, oh, well, I'm going to threaten you with a lawsuit. Anybody can threaten you with a lawsuit. But here's the thing. Somebody who's actually doing something illegal is most likely not going to bring that lawsuit against you. I'm not saying 100%, but I'm saying it's very easy to threaten. It's another thing to actually bring that lawsuit. So just something to keep in mind. Because I know we've gone that we've seen that before. People having pirate sites up there, and people complaining about it and being like, oh, well, I'm going to sue you. No, you're not, because let's be honest, you're so deep in copyright, infringement, that you would be completely laughed out of court. So something to keep in mind with regards to that. But I think the big thing is do your research. Find out if somebody actually is doing something against terms of service, with Amazon, or illegal, and build up a case. Don't just go because somebody posted on Twitter and then they got retweeted a dozen times that, hey, so and so is scamming people. Don't necessarily just believe that, because sometimes that is not always the case. It's always best to rather than jump on the witch burning bandwagon, to actually do your research before lighting your torch. That is always preferable. And also know what you're looking at. For example, in this case, I know Kindle Unlimited means exclusive. And somebody posting that that same story, in a different name somewhere, that pretty much, unless they have a specific, agreement with Amazon, which I doubt they do because they renamed the story elsewhere. That's a pretty easy thing to come across. But I've seen other people, they don't really even know what plagiarism is. For example, taking whole snippets of a book and either not rewording them at all, or just maybe changing names of characters and stuff. That's a case for plagiarism. However, a line of dialogue, I have a character say "fuck you." Well, guess what? If that were the case, then me and a million other urban fantasy authors have probably plagiarized a million other fantasy authors. It's a line that happens. But with regards to full snippets, but there's also the concept of things where it's almost plagiarism, but it's not. And those are and the smart scammers will basically put in the work of saying, okay, this is a story I'm going to rip off, but I'm going to reword everything enough so I make it my own words. And thus it's pretty obvious and pretty scummy, but it's not actionable. And that's the problem. There's really nothing you can do against that. So that's really all I can say is, do your homework. Don't jump. No, you're accusing somebody of. Do your research. Don't jump on bandwagons and witch hunts. Don't blame a whole group for the misdeeds of a few. Calm down a bit. And if you are the one doing this stuff, once again, I don't know why you're looking at this video series, but you're scumbags. But that's the thing. I would say right now we're in a position where, we kind of need to back a little bit up, and remember who the true bad guys are here. And that's our people who are willfully scamming readers, skimming money off the Kindle Unlimited store that they don't deserve. But also, once again, Amazon for really refusing to police their product. Best I can say is, don't be somebody who's who's gonna destroy somebody else's career simply because it seems like a bandwagon to jump on, and then afterwards you step back and you're like, holy crap, it turned out it was wrong. It was just actually somebody who had a valid reason to not have an author photo. So a little bit of calm goes a long way with regards to this. And all I can say outside of that is concentrate on writing the best stories you can, because ultimately, that's the way to survive in the long term in this business. Short-term gains versus long-term gains. And, I know I'm personally focused on the long term, putting out the best stories I can, written by me. And, doing what I can to survive. All right. I've probably beaten this horse into the ground, and if you're out there in the author community, you've probably seen it beaten into the ground already. So, my name is Rick Gualtieri. This is Tales of a Midlist Author. If you like this video, please do a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments, and I'm more than happy to get back to you. And I will talk to you again real soon.